All right, everyone. Welcome to the Expat Woman Show. Have you ever wondered what cultural intelligence is all about? You might have heard this word being discussed among the expat circles. And I'm really excited today to have Daniela Draugelis join me all the way from Pakistan to talk about cultural intelligence and how it can help you thrive in your expat life. Very quickly, my name is Nyna Caputi. I'm the founder and CEO of the Expat Woman and also the host of the Expat Show. I host the show every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and I bring on expats, expat influencers, and service providers to talk about how you can navigate life abroad and survive and thrive. So, without further ado, I'd love to have Daniela introduce herself, tell us a little bit about what she does and her expat journey. Go ahead, Daniela.
Well, thank you, Nina, for having me again in the Expat Woman Show. And it's really a great pleasure for me to be here. I am Daniela Draugelis, and yes, I am joining you from Islamabad, Pakistan, where it is 9 p.m. A little bit about me. I am Argentinian with Lithuanian roots. My family was born in Lithuania and escaped during World War II to Argentina, and that's where I was born and raised and studied. After completing my MBA, I started working for a company that had a joint venture with an American company. And after working for them for a couple of years, they offered me a job in their operations in the United States. So that's what took me to Miami. And my international journey started there in my capacity as an international marketing executive. And over a span of more than 15 years, I worked for different companies, Fortune 500 companies, startups, nonprofit organizations through 15 different countries, not only throughout Latin America, which was natural because of my background and my language, but also in other parts of the world. Traveled to more than 35 countries and counting, lived in 5 different countries, and really developed that love for you know um, l- learning and living in different parts of the world. Throughout the Lithuanian diaspora, I was lucky to meet my now husband of 28 years. We just celebrated our anniversary the other day, and he works for an international development organization, and that's what took us to China. We relocated to China with our 2 young boys several years ago, and we lived in China for 7 years and in Indonesia for a couple of years. We relocated or repatriated back to the US, and now we're in Pakistan. So really, both from a personal and lived experience and a professional point of view, crossing cultures has been part of my life, for part of my DNA my entire life. So when it was time to sort of figure out how to get back into my professional life, becoming an intercultural trainer and coach and consultant was natural. This interest in sharing my both my lived experience and my professional experience. So that's what drove me to become certified as a cultural intelligence trainer and consultant. And that's what I do. I help clients navigate the complexities of this cross-cultural world and cross-cultural interactions, and try to help them understand how culture impacts communication, collaboration, and mostly business outcomes.
Wow, what a journey! Are you so for those who are watching this live or joining us later on the replay, Daniela was a speaker at the Expat Woman Summit in March 2024. I had, I think, 20 speakers, and it's really hard to get to
Mhm.
know everyone personally because we're usually doing things in group. So I knew you had lived in a lot of countries, but I didn't know your expat journey, and it sounds amazing. I'm sure, moving abroad can be glamorous but also filled with challenges. For a person listening to this, like, wow, you got
Definitely.
to live in all these countries, how amazing. But I know it also came with challenges. But what I love about some of us with our expat lives is we sometimes get clarity on what we want to do with our careers. Like in your case, your moves to so many countries gave you, like, kind of, you pivoted into this cultural intelligence career, right, which you might not have happened if you had lived in Argentina or maybe just lived in the US. So, talking about cultural intelligence, and it was a new topic for me when I approached you for the summit, and you said, and then I asked you to speak on this topic because I had not heard about it before, even though I've been running the Expat Woman for the last 10 years and encountered so many women across the globe doing so many amazing things. So I wanted to start with you defining what cultural intelligence is for those people who've never heard that term before. You already touched upon briefly how you got into it. So just if you can expand on cultural intelligence, and then we'll go on to a further discussion about it.
Yeah, Nina, cultural intelligence is a term that is not quite widely known, as you said. Not a lot of people have heard of it. We've heard of IQ, we've heard of EQ, but cultural intelligence, or how it's known as CQ, is not as widely known. But cultural intelligence is
I think we lost Daniela. Uh, I know she's in Islamabad, so maybe they are having some internet issues. So let's wait till she comes back. I This is my, I can't talk too much about cultural intelligence because it's a new topic, and that's why I was bringing Daniela along. If you're joining us live, feel free to introduce yourself. And okay, there's Daniela. She is back. Uh,
I am back.
Daniela. Yeah, I was, yeah, I was
Sorry,
holding
sorry,
the
sorry.
fort, but I know, having grown up in India, I know about the power cuts. Sometimes I'm sure the same thing in Pakistan and South Asia. I
Sorry.
think it happens here in Silicon Valley too. I mean, you think living in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've sometimes gotten frozen on screen or kicked out. So be prepared for me getting kicked off as well. But so let's
No, no, no.
continue
We're
the
good. I'm back.
conversation. Yeah, so
So,
lovely. Okay, so
cultural intelligence is really the capability to function and relate effectively in culturally diverse situations. So it is really it is an academically valid way to measure cultural competence and predict multicultural effectiveness. It is a concept that has been researched and developed throughout the years, and throughout the world, to measure this capability to function in multicultural situations. And like I said, we all have heard of IQ, which is this capability to, measure knowledge and understanding, to acquire knowledge. We've heard of EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And both are definitely necessary when we interact with people from other cultures, right? We need to acquire that knowledge of other cultures, right? Understand how other people, act, and, understand, what happens in those other cultures, in those other situations. We usually have an emotional response in unfamiliar situations. That's where we talk about culture shock, right? When we go to another, place that is unfamiliar to us. But really, CQ, or cultural intelligence, sort of is an extension of IQ and EQ, because it is about having that knowledge, that awareness, that motivation, and the self-management, and the skills to be able to effectively operate in these, unfamiliar situations, in this multicultural environments. And it is a capability, so it is measurable and malleable, and it can be developed over time. So there are assessments that can be done, to measure this capability. And also there are tactics and and things that can be done to improve this capability over time. So through proper education, coaching, and proper education, that CQ can be also improved over time. Now to add to that, also I can mention that there are four key elements to cultural intelligence, or for pillars to cultural intelligence, and we talk about the drive, which is the motivation that a person has to interact, and the confidence to act in a multicultural situation. So, for example, as a person that comes in confidently into this, unfamiliar, situation, that is not afraid of traveling or interacting in a group of people that are different to him or her. Knowledge is the second pillar, or the second capability, and this is really the most common and easier to acquire, because it has to do with understanding how cultures are similar or different, right? So, and it's easily acquired through the internet, through books, through movies, through documentaries, etc. So I know that that culture or that country is different than mine. Strategy is the third capability, which is the ability to really understand, or strategize before I go into a situation. So, if I know that that culture is, more conservative than mine, how am I going to, prepare for that encounter, right? Am I going to, am I expected to bow before, I greet somebody? Or, which hand I'm supposed to use when I hand over my credit card, yeah, my business card, things like that. And if then something happens during the encounter that does not go according to plan, how can I reflect on that encounter so that it doesn't happen the next time? So that ability to sort of both plan ahead of the encounter and then reflect, on that situation. And then the last capability is action. How do I put it all together and adapt my behavior? So, adapt my communication, both direct or indirect communication, my tone of voice, etc. Knowing what I know, that knowledge that I acquired, to adapt my behavior in those encounters.
That's fantastic. I love how you put it in a nutshell and in this four-part kind of framework. So, in terms of, because I know you moved to Pakistan. Now, I've never traveled to Pakistan, unfortunately, with the whole India Pakistan thing. It's so silly, but maybe now I can because I have a US passport. But yeah, so let's take cultural intelligence in the context of you moving. Were you in China and then moved to Pakistan, or were you in the US and then
No,
moved?
no, we were in China, Indonesia, back to the US, and now in
Okay. But
Pakistan.
I know
So,
Pakistan would be very different from, say, China or the US or Argentina. I mean, each
mhm.
country. But let's talk about you using cultural intelligence when you move to Pakistan. Or let's say someone like you is moving from the US to, and I'm using Pakistan as the example because you live there. You know,
Yeah.
how do they start with the cultural intelligence before they move to Pakistan, or once they move to the country? And let's take Pakistan as example for you or anyone else who was going to move to this country from the US.
Well, Nina is a perfect example, to talk about, tight cultures and loose cultures, right?
Okay,
And
great.
specifically talking about expat women, right? Because women in particular face specific challenges when moving across cultures, that sometimes, I mean, men as well, but since we're in the Expat Women show, we can talk specifically about some of the challenges that women face. And for me, coming from, uh, you know con- having grown up in Argentina, having lived in the United States, coming to a country like Pakistan was certainly a very different experience. And I mentioned tight cultures and loose cultures, right? So tight cultures are those cultures with very strong, well-defined rules and norms, with very low tolerance for deviating from those rules, right? And not very flexible. Think about Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or Japan, right? Or even Germany, right? Germanic cultures, right? When you're talking about punctuality or very strict rules on how things are supposed to be done, right? In the case of Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, has to do with the roles of women in society, dress code expectations, the gender role expectations, right? So those are very tight cultures. Loose cultures, on the other hand, are very relaxed, very flexible, much more informal, much more casual. Think about the United States, Latin America cultures, Australia. You were just in Australia, right? Visiting. Probably traveling from the United States to Australia, you didn't feel very different,
Wow.
right?
Yes.
Because there's a lot of similarities in the way they communicate, in the way they act, right? So when women travel, and again, I'm talking about women because we're in the Expat Women show. When you move across cultures, which culture you move from and to has a lot to do with what kind of adjustment you have to make and how that impacts you as a person,
Right.
right? And what are those challenges and how you approach those challenges. Nevertheless, yes, understanding the norms, the values of that country ahead of time is one of the most valuable things that you can do, right? Preparing ahead of time, acquiring that knowledge, right? We talked about CQ knowledge as one of the pillars of, one of those capabilities of cultural intelligence. So learning about those local norms, values, customs, the idioms, even though they speak English, and you probably noticed that in Australia as well, right? Some of the idioms could be different and could have very different meanings,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So trying to find somebody that can guide you through, and provide you with that orientation. And sometimes they could be the sponsoring organization can provide you with that information. um, the other thing that you can do to build that cultural intelligence is also try to find a local organization or a local, network of women. Sometimes there are international women's organizations or a local club, or if you're associated with some embassy or such, they can also provide some of this, information. If not, the internet is a wonderful thing, right?
Right.
Where
No,
you
but
can find
yeah.
a lot of information as well.
I mean, this is just so fascinating, Daniela, because I've never thought of it from that aspect. Like usually, maybe because I'm no longer like as of now, I'm not an expat, but I love to travel. So I do look up, a little. I join Facebook groups for the country I'm traveling to. Like last year, we went to Switzerland and Germany. So I joined Facebook groups for those countries just to learn even things like tipping. How do you travel? If I was going to, as you said, a country that has, you spoke about, what did you say? Tighter and looser norms? What was
Tight, tight cultures and loose
Food culture,
cultures.
right? So
Yes.
I think that's also something we need to keep in mind. I've never heard those expressions before. I mean, I'm learning so much
Mm-hmm.
in this time, and so yeah, I think that's really important because, and even when you go to a country with a looser culture, for instance, when I came from India to the US. Even though I was exposed to Western culture, I'd never traveled to the US. I traveled and lived in other Western countries, and my company was a multinational. So, but there were still things I had to learn in the US. For instance, in India, we ask, and I'm sure you've experienced this in Pakistan, we ask a lot of direct questions because it's not being nosy, it's just the way we are. Maybe we're very friendly, so we feel we need know everything about the person to make the person feel welcome. And then the US, I was considered being nosy, and I often felt like I was interviewing the person because the person was not asking me questions in return, and I was like, so there's also like sometimes even you go from maybe a tight culture to a looser culture where there's less rules,
Exactly.
right? You have to also learn certain things, and also in terms of idioms, or if you've lived in a country which is where English is the like business language. Like in India, we were a British colony, so we speak more British English. And like my husband's American, we still sometimes argue about which is the correct word or term, right? So even little things like that. And then when I went to Australia, it was like, wow, the sun never sets on the British Empire, right? So I'm sure Pakistan's the same, where there's this British influence, where so you go to a country like Australia after 20 years, I feel like I was feeling like I was more at home than I was in the US because there was such a British influence there. So the English, everything's the metric system. They walk on the side of the road that we walk on in India, right? So even those little things. But coming back to what you said, yes, sometimes I think there is this information available on the internet, but sometimes maybe it's not, like you said. So, what would the strategy be for someone who's now planning to move to another country? They're not even sure about whether it's a loose culture or tight culture. And now, because they've listened to this, they're like, oh my gosh, I need to, to make my expat life smoother, or my transition into this country. What are some
Yeah.
strategies they can implement?
Yeah. Well, again, and I mentioned this before, there are assessments out there that can help you figure that out, right? And a coach, an intercultural coach, can help you identify those assessments. Understanding culture is first and foremost a journey of self-discovery, right? And the first step is really understanding who you are. And once you understand who you are, you're in a much better position to also understand where you're going, right? So once you understand what is the culture that you're coming from, you will also be in a better position to be much more open-minded, empathetic, and ready to and be better prepared to encounter that situation where you're going into. So working with a coach that can help you identify those, that assessment that helps you again understand the culture that you're coming from and say, okay, I'm relocating to country X, right? What is that culture that I'm going to, and what is the gap, right? Between my values, my norms, where I'm coming from, and the culture that I'm going to, right? So I'm better prepared. So there are assessments out there, and that's something that we intercultural coaches do, right, for our clients. And then we help you also you develop these strategies, right? To develop these, I talked about, CQ strategy, CQ action, right, with tips and recommendations on how to be better prepared, and even through the journey, right? Again, mobility, relocation is not an easy journey for anybody, right? You can have all the enthusiasm that you want, but the reality is that it is not an easy journey, right? You said. So, we can certainly help you through that process. Through journaling, through mentorship, through, again, tips and strategies to hold your hand through the process. Now, one of the most important things is to be open-minded, non-judgmental, to be curious, to try your best to, find connection with people on the ground, being, other expats or even with the locals, right? The more you learn about the local culture, you'll be in a better position to be more understanding of, the host country, and and being intentional about your experience, because at the end of the day, it is a wonderful journey, right? And and the more you embrace the journey, the more you embrace this opportunity, the more you're going to enjoy it, and the more you're going to learn from it.
That's beautiful. That those are really valuable tips. And every one of them very powerful. And I wish I had met you when I moved to the US, because as I said, it can be moving from a one culture to maybe a more Western, more open culture. And it's still hard. And you're constantly learning. I've been in the US for almost 21 years now, and I still feel there are times when I'm still learning something new. Right? It never
Absolutely.
stops. Right? Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Never
and then when I
stop
go,
learning.
yeah, and then when I go back and visit India, it's like I feel I've grown apart from India. It's also, there's also that challenge. Like you've been exposed to one culture, but then when you go back for a short time to your country of origin, you've grown apart from that, and then kind of, you know, figuring out how am I respectful to my home country? Because that's, I'm sure you might have experienced that. Maybe other expat people feel like, oh, now that you're living in this country, you don't value our customs and you suddenly become so Americanized or whatever. So it's also,
Look,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and look, I mean, first of all, we change as well, right? I mean, you said that you lived, in the US for 20 some years. I'm sure you're not the person that you were 20 some years ago. So you've changed and you see things differently than you did 20 some years ago. When you go back to India, also, you're not the same person that you were 20 some years ago. For those people who repatriate, oh my goodness, repatriation is one of the biggest challenges that we face, right? When we repatriated after living abroad for 9 years, that is also one of the biggest challenges that we have, because we had certain experiences. The people that stayed in one place in our home country, uh, you know had different experiences, and that is also challenging. You can't just say, well, I'm going back to my old life, because you're not. So every stage has different challenges, and that's why sometimes if you feel like something is just not right, reach out to friends, to family, or to a coach, somebody that can help you, and guide you through the process,
Absolutely. No,
because it's not an easy journey, but it's a wonderful journey,
it is.
and it
It is.
can be a wonderful journey.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about cultural pathways. I know we're almost done. So what is some of the work you do for people listening to this, watching this? 'Cause you spoke briefly about being a cultural intelligence coach. So what are all the
Yeah.
things you offer through your organization?
So I offer assessments both for individuals and for organizations. I offer workshops for organizations that have challenges with teams, right? Multicultural teams that that work in group settings, and for individuals as well. And organizations that have expats that are relocating overseas, if they work in across borders, organizations that are sending their families abroad as well. So, and I do individual coaching as well.
Wonderful. I'm still curious about Pakistan because you moved so I'm going to ask you, like, for you, what did you do to prepare yourself for Pakistan? And were there still some culture shocks you faced, even though you're a cultural intelligence coach? Because I feel you can never be fully prepared, right? So just curious.
To prepare, I read a book. Actually, gosh, I wish you told me earlier. I could have pulled it from the library. It's called Culture Shock Pakistan.
Wow.
And actually, it's a whole series. There's a whole series of culture shock books, because I had read Culture Shock Indonesia when we moved to Indonesia. It's not big, and it has sort of all the basics about Pakistan. I read it on the 30-hour journey, on the plane. Things that continue to shock me. That's really interesting. Um, you know, uh, Time management. Sometimes they're polychronic, definitely, and you have to just go with the flow.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
Yeah, in India we call it IST, Indian Stretchable Time, because so maybe you can call it PST, Pakistan Stretchable Time. Just don't mix it up with the Pacific Standard Time. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. We and I still bring that culture with me here. My husband's American. He's very punctual. I still have a hard time even today. So I showed up 2 minutes before. So it's just so great in our culture. So, but yeah, I can. Yeah, some things I'm sure are hard to get used to. But I didn't know about the culture shock books. That's really interesting. Is that like the like like you have the chicken soup for the soul? Is it like a
Yeah, yeah,
series?
yeah.
Is it a series like that by the same author, or are they different authors?
I would have to check.
Okay, maybe you can check and you can let us know in the comments because that's
Yeah.
fascinating. That's really I had not heard about that, and that you were able to do it on your flight to Pakistan when you were
Yeah, they're
relocating.
small.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So
Yeah.
we are at the end. This is I have to bring you back because I just think this is such a interesting and important topic that I think people don't pay enough. We're more focused on, which is important, we're focused on finances and kids schools and finding a house, but I think very often the whole cultural aspect of it and how we can fit in the culture gets swept under the carpet. So thank you for the work you do. How can people find you or connect with you before we end the show?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a website, culturalpathways.com, and through that, they can also reach me by email at Daniela@culturalpathways.com, and I'm sure you'll add all of that, those links as well. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniela. This was amazing. You
Thank
packed
you
a
so
lot.
much, Nyna.
Yeah, you packed a lot of information, and I've learned so much in this 30 minutes. So we will definitely have you back. But hopefully, people who are watching this will be inspired and ready for their next move, or even in the country they're currently living in, to learn more about it, so you can feel like you fit in, right? So yeah, and thanks to everyone who's watching it.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thank you.